Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a second timer here. We have Herve Billiet, and he was on the podcast not too long ago. It was April 5th, 2023. That's 2023 AD. And he's on here again. And we're going to talk about a lot of interesting stuff because time changes things. And Herve sold a company since then. So we're going to find out how to sell companies and all that kind of stuff. He's going to tell me how to sell my company for $1 billion, just like he sold his company for $1 billion. That's going to be pretty cool. Plus, the last time that he was on the podcast, he said, I'm going to interview you next time. And he just reminded me of that. So he's got a list of questions. So we're going to go and have some fun. Welcome, Herve.
Oh, thanks for having me back a second time.
Yeah, and it's always fun to see you at all the different solar shows, and you and Joe are a lot of fun hanging out with. So what was it like to sell your company for $1 billion? And what's it like to be a billionaire? How many private jets do you have? Or are you one of those billionaires that tries to be low key and wears a flannel shirt and flies in like Coach or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, finding climate change, you don't fly around with the private jets too much, right?
Oh yeah, you're probably doing a sailboat with Greta.
Something more like that, yeah. So, well, not a billionaire yet, a few zeros off, but
Oh, well, it just depends on which currency, I guess. There's probably some kind of South American inflated currency that we can call it on, or Dogecoin or whatever, I'm sure you're a Doge billionaire.
Solar coin, I think at some point existed too, right?
Yeah, that's probably worth some fraction of a cent right now.
But to answer your question, what did it feel like? It's mixed feelings. You first build up something, you spend all your time and energy into it, and you see it grow. And you put up a management structure in place, take good care of your employees. So you put a lot of your soul into it, take care of your customers, employees, all your stakeholders. And but then, at some point, you came to the realization that we started a software company to help not just Ipsun, but also other solar companies. And that became successful. That's growing. And then something start from an idea like, hey, let's all have an app. Every solar company should have an app to manage your customers and automate stuff, automate communication. And then there was managing two companies, and let alone managing one is already hard enough. So now I was managing two companies. And so I had to make a very tough decision to just let go of one. One was large and sellable, and large, depending how you look at it, of course, but one was sellable on the market.
Okay, so let's talk about the names of the companies and all that. So it's Ipsun is the company that you sold.
Yep.
And that's an EPC. And it's also in the Washington, D.C. area, and people are still working there and doing well and everything. And then there's Sunvoy, which was your software company that you are focusing full time on. And you know what? I can kind of identify with that because I'm always doing a whole lot of things. And I have a solar contractor's license, and I've done installations and all that kind of stuff. And maybe I should have tried to sell the company, but I just kind of let it fade out because I was just too busy to take on new solar installation jobs. And so then the hard part for me is referring to somebody that's not going to make somebody mad because people are so busy, and some people are good and some people are bad. So that's always a tricky part. Now, what I just tell people to do is go look at the NABCEP website and make sure that they're doing business with people there, because they can look up solar installers, solar certified people, solar technical salespeople. They can see which companies have the most people that have passed the test that are smart and stuff like that. Plus, if somebody makes a mistake, NABCEP could take away their certification if they were lying. So that's kind of like a good check and balance, or whatever you call it. It's like politics time. So we got to talk about checks and balances. So you sold Ipsun Solar for $1 billion something. We don't know what kind of billionaire you are. We'll have to go look at the value of all the different currencies to figure it out. Plus, you'll have to tell me how much you sold it for. But yeah, like, what would it be like? I mean, I could have done that myself. I could have kept my business, but installing and then tried to sell it. But I've never sold a company, and I've seen people have sold a lot of companies. One company that I remember that was sold that was kind of really cool was there was a guy that made Zepp Solar, and I can even remember the number. He sold it to Solar City at the time, which is now Tesla, for $158 million. And to me, that was just like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but you don't have those every day either, right? Like those are kind of, I mean, we all know Zepp. That's a good example. There's not like $100 Zeps out there. But I think my first point of view is like, it doesn't just happen. You don't just suddenly sell a company. Like it took about a year for us from the point where it's like, okay, you're thinking about it, and then you actually make the decision, we're gonna sell. Then it took a year to kind of put it all together. So it doesn't just, some people tells like, oh, is it just happened? Or it's like, oh, you do it on the side? Like, no, it was like a full-time job to really do that. So luckily I had a management team that was running the business, and my co-founder Joe was really making an active decision. Like, you're gonna run the company more day to day, and I'll go spend time and effort in selling the company. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of paperwork and bookkeeping and accounting and all that kind of stuff that going along with it, attorneys, CPAs.
Yeah, it's a lot of extra work. So if you would think like, well, I'm gonna start a business and I'll do it like, during the weekends, I'll do some paperwork. That's gonna be depending on your situation, right? Like it's gonna be hard. It's like a full-time job. You first like you decide to sell, and then you can either go to market yourself or you find a broker. But brokers ask for a lot of money. So you need to interview multiple brokers, find one because they're all different, right? You have a broker that deals with like tech companies or renewable companies or solar specific. That's pretty weird. There's not a lot of just solar only brokers out there. And then they deal with like large companies or manufacturing companies or like small companies. And so you need to find a broker that actually is a good fit.
So you get too busy to run two businesses. So then you have to get three times as busy because it's a whole other business selling a business. And then you have to deal with a broker. And to me, that sounds kind of scary because how do you know if you get a good one or a bad one?
Well, it's like everything, right? You just make a decision and then you move forward. And if it's not the right decision, you just change your mind, crawl back and make another decision. But no, that wasn't really a big part of, I wasn't worried about that. You talk to enough brokers, you kind of get a feeling for what they are looking for is a good match. You make your selection, you move forward. And so the next step then is creating like a little one pager for marketing. Like in our case, it was like a company on the East Coast with a good management team and branding is looking for an acquisition to be acquired. For us, it was a stock deal because you could have stock or other types of deals. For us, it was a stock deal, no asset deal. And we were very clear from the beginning that management is moving on. That was the goal for us to spend all our time on Sunvoy. So we made it very clear on the beginning. And then the broker helps make like a little pamphlet, a one pager that they send out to their network. So that's where it starts.
So you said it was a stock deal, no asset deal. What does that mean?
Means you sell the stocks of the corporation instead of just selling all the assets and then the corporation is left to die. For example, a lot of like old, more complicated customers or something that they are with a stock deal, everything moves over to a new owner that owns everything, all assets and liabilities, everything, instead of just taking the assets out.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting. And so also another thing too that you must have negotiated is like some sort of not to compete. So I've seen it happen before where somebody opens up a business and then they sell it and then they open up
Mhm.
the same business on the other side of the street.
Yeah,
So are you not allowed to open up a similar type of business in your area, something like that?
it's more complex than that. So I think the non-competes are very common also on my contracts likely. But then the other piece is that there is new regulation about non-compete from I think US government. It says that you cannot have a non-compete anymore.
Oh, really?
So
Huh.
all non-competes are invalid unless they were signed by both parties in full agreement before specific dates when the new rule came into place. It's like a few months old. It's like maybe 3, 4 months. Yeah, non-compete regulation for US government. So,
That's kind of not cool. It makes it maybe even harder to sell your business.
well, so much of selling a business is still built on relationship. You can have hundreds of pages of contract. In the end, what matters still is the person on the other side of the table you deal with.
But it kind of seems like it opens it up to people that are going to con you. You know, they're like, oh, buy my business. And then they open up one across the street or something like that. Uh, and I'm sure you wouldn't do that. But just for both parties, I would think that it would be a good thing to be able to sell. It makes the deal more valuable.
Yeah, but if I go back to my days at Ipsun Solar, we had a non-competing standard working agreements and with employees. And then yet some people say like, look, Hervé, like I'm gonna go start my own business. And instead of no, you're gonna stay, like that doesn't really work. If a
Mm.
person wants to go do something, I was actually supporting them. I had several businesses started by former employees of Ipsen. One is a maintenance company. And then of course I called like a few weeks later, like, hey Hervé, I need this type of racking. Do you mind if I come by the warehouse and you sell me some? It's like, look, man, just come by. I'll give you some. Don't ask me for payment. Like, just use it. Go help your customer and you'll be good. Maybe that wasn't a good decision because then he came back all the time asking for more. But it's like help people move to the next stage. Like, I think I see this pointless trying to prevent people from doing what they actually want to do. You want to start your own business? I applaud it. It's great. More people in the solar industry will benefit from more employees in general, more businesses doing all types of different services. So there are several businesses that were started from employees at Ipsen, and I'm actually proud of it. So I never enforced those non-compete agreements.
Yeah, and I guess the good thing about that too is it puts attorneys out of business. And
Isn't AI doing that already now?
yeah, I guess. I don't know. They'll probably end up in court more often. You know, you can't have AI testify for you in court, but I'm sure that the attorneys are charging double now because they just have AI do all the work. And then they're like, oh, it was 10 hours and they only spent an hour, you know.
Maybe,
Uh,
maybe. Yeah, I use AI a lot.
uh,
Just a tip to your listeners, like if you need to have a new job description for a person, job description of a solar maintenance person. That's it. Type that in AI and you get a full job description. I mean, you can use that as a base. After that, you adapt it to your liking, but you don't have to do the first draft anymore yourself. So it's really useful.
well, cool. That's very awesome. And so the company that you sold, it's like an EPC. And so that stands for engineering, procurement, construction. And that pretty much means that you go around installing stuff. You're sort of like an installer. Is that how you might describe it? And like sometimes an EPC doesn't even do the procurement, but they always seem to do the construction. Sometimes they don't do the engineering, but they always do the construction. And then you have different sizes of EPCs, or like I should say different size jobs that they do. So were you doing residential, commercial, utility scale? I guess there's nothing bigger than utility scale yet.
I mean, even utility scale, when I did my first solar project, with like 1 mega was like so gigantic big that I never thought I would ever touch it. And then in Virginia now, I think they install 700 megawatt projects now, like
Mhm.
huge pieces. But so Ipsen has done up to, I think, 700-800 kilowatt projects.
800 kilowatts.
Yeah, I don't think I've done a megawatt yet.
So a lot of people still, even these days, call that distributed generation, where like if you went back to the year 2000, I'm sure they would have called something that big utility scale, you know. And if you looked at the National Electrical Code, they have like a different thing for when something is greater than 5 megawatts. And so you were building projects probably that are more like commercial, industrial, could be was like rooftop or ground mount and offsetting loads, I guess, like behind the meter. That's pretty cool. Was it a company that bought your company? How did you find them? How was the experience? Are you still working with them?
So yes, I'm still working with them a little bit. And the way it works is you have a broker and they have a network. You also bring in people that you may know yourself. You bring them to the table and like, hey, we're looking for a buyer. And then you interview the different buyers and you try to sell your company. So you say how good and strong and great you are. And then, you also look at them like, do you want them to take over your legacy? Everything you've built, you want to hand it over to those people. So a lot of the buyers were all different sizes and types and locations in the country, and the deal structure is also different. You have people are like, well, if I can buy you, then I go knock on a door of a bank and I try to get a loan, which is very different than somebody's like, well, here are my pockets full of money, so if I can buy you, I'll hand you the money. So you have a lot of different items. Money is one piece, but then also like, how are you going to deal? What's their vision to move forward with the company? So it's not just about the money, but it's a lot more like, is it the right mentality? Do they value what we've built so far? What are their plans moving forward, and so on? So,
What would your advice be to somebody who wants to sell their company?
ah, I like that question. Since it's public, knowledge that I sold, I had a lot of people reach out to me to ask me like the exact same question. So my number one advice, like, it doesn't just happen. It's an active decision that you actually want to sell. Once you make that decision, there is work to be done. You need to clean up your accounting. A lot of little pieces that you've left out or that you say, I'm going to do it next year, like make sure everything is in accounting nice and clean. Go back, clean things up. Because if you don't do that, the buyer is just going to see things and is going to ask more questions, and now you have to explain yourself. So make sure all your books are in order, all your legal items are in order. Remember where you put those legal documents when you start a company. Go find them, dust them off. Make sure you don't have any owners of the company that are lost somewhere. Make sure you own 100% of your business so that you can tell 100% of your business. Make sure all your cars, you have the license plates, the VIN numbers, like all of that information. Employees, make sure you have all information on all your employees. Make sure all your employees have contracts. Make sure, like, so do a big cleanup, make and verify that you have all of that. Legally, also make sure every one of your customers has a contract. I mean, those were a lot of questions when they asked me, like, do you have our contracts? Well, of course we have. We keep them here. Like, it's not a big deal. But there may be some companies where that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. So make sure you ride a tight ship. You have everything in order. If you agree with subcontractors need to have contracts. Make sure you have everything in order. All your taxes are paid, for example, things like that. So prepare yourself to answer a lot of questions. Obviously, the buyer, there's a lot of questions about money and financial piece. They look at the books. So make sure you understand your own books and know your numbers. If they ask you like how many million in revenue and you kind of like don't really know, then that's not a good impression either. So make sure you know your KPIs.
I imagine it's sort of like getting audited. So, except the difference between getting audited by the IRS and selling a company as one, you have to pay, and the other one you get paid. But do you think that all the paperwork or the amount of hours you put in, and I guess it really just depends on how organized you were in the first place. And I'm sure, get a tax audit would be a whole lot more stressful. But do you think it's like similar amount of organization that it takes?
Yeah, I think so. We've been very meticulous at Ipsun, so everything was organized already. Of what I mentioned, what I didn't expect is the amount of times that you need to repeat yourself. So it's not that you have one buyer and you're talking one person and then they make the decision. There's an entire team of people, and then they hire consultants to check from the tax pieces, an expert accountant that looks into things, and then they hire a legal team. And you keep repeating yourself over and over and over and sharing the same documents, not just once or twice, but like 10, 15 times. But so with all the different partners that look into the business. So it was quite an intense. I heard from the lawyers on my team and their team that it seems to have been like a much larger transaction than it actually was. So it was very in-depth analysis of our business, but we showed all the process and procedures we had. So it's a lot. I mean, just when you think about a tech stack of a solar business, you have a lot of different softwares, at least for us, that we combined with special coding. That all works nicely together. So we had to explain all of that. Like, that takes some time and ingenuity.
So I'm supposed that you didn't just show up with a cubic yard full of receipts and paperwork, that you just threw it in there over the last 5 or 10 years and then sell it to them by the square foot, something like that for the company price. Is there a formula for that?
Yeah, and all the paperwork, AI can solve that right now. Like, here you go, guys. Here's all the receipts for the last 7 years. No, everything nice and clean, good to understand. And then they still ask a lot of questions. And so
Maybe I'm going to ask the AI, like, how much is a cubic yard of paperwork business worth, like for each cubic yard of paperwork? See what it comes up with. Try to stump the AI.
what I learned of the valuation of a business is, like, in the end, we run a business, we run it to fight climate change, give jobs to people and fight climate change. But a financier that looks at your business, they just ask, what's your EBITDA? It comes down to your EBITDA. And so the valuation of a business is a multiplier of that EBITDA. How profitable are you as a business?
What was the word? EBITDA?
Yeah, EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, and appreciation. EBITDA is a key number. It's like, when you work with solar panels, wattage and kilowatt hours. Same, if you're going to sell your business, EBITDA will be daily talk.
Okay, great. And then another thing is that are you a B Corp? Or like you have two companies, are they both B Corps or just one of them?
Oh, no, I forgot to put Sunvoy as a B Corp, but you're right. Ipsun Solar is a B Corporation, yes.
Okay. And are they both a B Corp? Or
Sunvoy is not. No.
okay. So Ipsun Solar being a B Corp probably helped because, you have to have clean books to do that, I would imagine. And so B Corp means a benefit corporation and it's a legal entity.
It is. In the state of Virginia, we are legally a B corporation, which is a type of C corporation, but officially it's B Corp. Yeah,
Oh, but there's no federal B Corp filings like there is for a nonprofit or anything like that.
correct. It's just C Corp, but in the state of Virginia, being incorporated could change from a C Corp to an actual B Corp. Some states allow you that.
But I thought B Corp might just be a type of like an extra thing you can add on to your C Corp. Like you're probably a C Corp just for all purposes for the IRS and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then let's see, there's a C Corp, and that's what the big companies are where you buy stock and all that stuff. And then there is an S Corp, and a lot of people have S Corps, and S Corps are a little bit more like for individuals, I guess. They say that you don't get double taxation and things like that. But talk to your CPA. And I have a corporation too, White House Energy Incorporated, and I'm not a B Corp. I've looked at it and it just looks like, wow, that's a bunch of paperwork. I'll do that next year.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot.
Yeah, and some people think of a B Corp as like being a nonprofit organization or something like that. So it's still a for-profit. Like I think maybe one of the more famous B Corps would be where I get a lot of clothes is Patagonia. So that guy that started Patagonia, what a cool guy. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. Anyway, so congratulations again on selling your company. And we did talk a lot about the other company that you have when you were on last time in April of 2023. But what's new? What's going on with your Sunvoy company?
Yeah, well, we do still a big part is the same, right? We create apps for solar installers all around the US and the world, in multiple countries now in multiple languages. So every solar installer receives an app, put in the app store, and then their customer can track their project during construction. Once there is power, they can track the power in that solar installer's app. The benefit is automated communication, and the homeowner knows where projects are at, and they stay top of mind to refer friends and family and neighbors.
Yep.
That's the first part.
Yeah. And so from what I remember, you were kind of marketing towards smaller solar companies that have all these different products. And then there's all these different places on the internet. Like they might have a system that's Enphase and one that's Solar Edge and one that's SMA. And they're trying to coordinate everything and throw it all together. And you just have one app that somebody can look at and go like, this is how much my house is making.
Yeah.
And I would think too that that would be very convenient for some of this future stuff, like bidirectional electric vehicles with virtual power plants, coordinating with your solar and your loads and all that kind of stuff, coordinating with some hardware, like you have some of these companies that are making like energy management systems and things like that.
Yeah, that's where all of these heading. So first we build an app to show a homeowner where the projects are at. That's one. Then we connected all the different inverters, like you said, the Solage, the Enphases, the Tesla, like everything's connected. One umbrella. So no matter what a solar installer installs, they can just see an overview of everything that they installed. Also see what they promised the customer compared to what is actually being produced. We had a lot of customers calling in like, hey, I think I'm underproducing. They're like, well, let's check. And so instead of having to, download some Excel sheets and look up the contract and kind of figure it out, now when a customer like that calls, you look up their name in the system and then you see a graph. You see the estimate compared to the actuals, and like it tells you, like, oh, you had plus 12%. No, you're totally fine. You tell the customer, like, you can even send them a little screenshot of it, like, you're good. So this takes engineering time away. We give you all the data on one screen.
Yeah. And then plus, from what I remember too, the customer, instead of you selling them a solar system and then they have SunPower. Hopefully it doesn't say SunPower because SunPower went bankrupt, but it says something like SunPower on there instead of their company name. So they can have it say their company name like on the app. And so it's like better marketing and better if you want to sell your company too. Yeah.
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 Well, let's take Ipsun Solar, for example. If you type Ipsun Solar in the App Store, the Google Play Store, you just see an app from Ipsun Solar. Now, that was built by Sunvoy, but Sunvoy is white label. We don't mention it. If you're a homeowner and you pay like 20, 30, $60,000 to a solar company, let's take Ipsun Solar as an example, you trust that solar company. So you expect an app from that solar company. It's as simple as that. But then on the flip side, if you're the solar company, you sell, let's say, Enphase, and then you switch to Solich, you switch back to Enphase or Tesla or whatever happens over the many years, you end up with a fleet of a lot of customers with all types of hardware you installed. And now you can add circuit level monitoring, you can add EV chargers, batteries. So you can install all types of hardware. And if you stay small, you install a few a month, you have hundreds of customers, you still remember somewhat what you did. But once you grow, you have thousands of customers. It's just too much. So then you need software. And that software didn't quite exist. So we build it. So the next piece, what you mentioned, is what starts happening is like the virtual power plants are coming where you control assets. And that's coming next, I believe.
Great. So how much are you going to sell me Sunvoy for?
Well, look, I enjoy what I'm doing, so I'm looking for more partners to join the Sunvoy story. So we're very knowledgeable about what we do, and it's really fun. And we're developing now new products that literally does not exist on this planet. Well, if it doesn't exist on this planet, we can also say it doesn't exist on this galaxy. So we're really building brand new ways of thinking and tools to give solar installers. So I'm not going to sell it, but if you want to join us, that's a different story.
Yeah, I think that there is another company that's doing this that's on the other side of the supermassive black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. You just don't know about them because the gravity and light and all that stuff.
Possible, yeah. Who knows? Maybe. That's a different story, though.
Uh-huh. Well, that sounds pretty cool. But yeah, it sounds pretty exciting. And so how do people go about getting it? And how do you like sign up as a subscription?
Yeah, it's subscription based. It's a SaaS platform. You go to sunvoy.com and you'll have a big contact us button over there.
SaaS, software as a service,
Mm-hmm.
tech lingo. But I guess everybody's turning tech these days. And that way people don't have to do it from Tesla. So let's see, is anything else that we want to talk about you before you start your own podcast? And you said you wanted to interview me.
Maybe the next piece that we're looking at with Sunvoy. So we build like Sunvoy API. So all the different inverters that you have, most companies want to have a nice UI, the app in the App Store. And then you have more like financiers, developers, all types of other companies that it's like, wow, I'm tired of having to create all those APIs myself. They want to have one API to the Sunvoy platform to get
Remind me of API. I know you said UI, user interface, and then API.
application programming interface.
Okay, application programming interface.
Yeah. So instead of you go to a browser and you see information, it's like your machine pings another machine and get the data directly. And then it's up to you to do something with that data. Either you display it somewhere or you save it in a database or something, but you don't really have a UI anymore.
So you're not talking about the American Petroleum Institute. Guess you're not working
No,
with them. That's the other
no,
API.
that's the other API.
Yeah, so it's application programming interface. So you are like using silicon on both sides of the equation here. We're talking about solar cells, talking about computer chips, programming, software, all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool. Yeah. Awesome. So everybody go check it out. Get yourself some Sunvoy. All right. So did you want to do your podcast thing on me now?
Sure.
Huh?
Well, Sean, last time we spoke, it was dawning on me that you've been in the industry for so many years and you interview me and I have way less experience than you. So I said, like, wouldn't it be nice to listen more to what you are thinking? And so one of my first questions sounds like, what have you seen change the most over the years in the solar industry? I think at the beginning, maybe our racking was in wood, and now we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Or like the solar panels honestly changed, but
Yeah, a lot less splinters from your racks, a lot less splinters from your racks. Yeah, I just on Monday, there's a friend of mine who's kind of well known in the solar industry, Matt Pace, who I think in the winter he's going to get on the podcast. And he's famous for being a solar guy. Now he's an energy storage guy and a firefighter. And I first heard of him because John Wiles said, "Oh, I was going to do a talk for a fire department." He's like, "You got to talk to this guy." And I contacted him, got his information and stuff like that. But I had some Arco solar modules from the Carrizo Plains solar project. I bought 12 of them secondhand that somebody had on his roof since the 80s in San Francisco. And they're in pretty good shape. They're a little bit browned. And I handed one to Matt, and he's like, "I wonder if I soldered this one." So when he was in high school, he was in Southern California, and he had a job soldering together these things. I think he said it was in 1982. And he was soldering to, he's like, "We were pretty fast at soldering these." And so I thought that was pretty cool. In fact, I was thinking after I left that I should have videoed him explaining how he soldered those, because that, I just thought that was cool. Maybe we'll have to catch up and do that again.
It's not that difficult actually. Like I did the same, like when I did the Solar Olympics many years ago in Belgium. We gave a solar panel to students as like a national championship, and the cell manufacturer said, like, fine, we can give you the cells, but you need to come to a factory and solar them yourself. So a team of 10 people went there, we're like making them. They literally showed you, like, look, this is how you do it, and now you keep doing it for an entire week.
Yeah, I'm sure they're doing probably all robots now for like most of the solar that we have. I remember I went to a SunTech factory probably in about 2009 or 10 in China, and they said half of them were being soldered by hand and the other half by machine.
Still?
Yeah, even at that time. And I guess, they're just working on perfecting robots or something. That's what they told me. I don't know. That's just what I was told by
I
the
also
person that gave
always
me.
feel like when you open the box to take solar panels out of it, I always think I'm the first human to actually touch those panels because I thought everything was automated by now.
Probably so. Well, that was a while ago. I mean, this industry is growing so fast. But like, so yeah, you were just saying like how things changed. And so these old modules, they were like secondhand from the world's largest solar project. It was probably like most of the whole solar in the world. Then they took it apart because the energy crisis and all that kind of stuff was over, and the gas line shortened up. And it was just some California thing, I guess you could say, that they were doing. And of course, the PV modules were like, I don't know what it was back then, it was probably like 20 something dollars a watt to make this big old project. It was 5 or 6 megawatts. And then everybody was getting secondhand, and it was a bunch of hippies out in the hills and all that kind of stuff. And then Home Power Magazine, everybody was just, doing secondhand solar out of Home Power. In fact, there's a neat movie that Jeff Spees, I don't know if you know who he is. He's also been on this podcast.
Hmm.
And we were talking about solar history, and he's got a movie called Solar Roots. And I saw like the first version of it, but it was like he had Grateful Dead music in there, and somebody owns the license to it. It's not even the Grateful Dead, I forget. And so it would be like $50,000 just to use one song, Ripple or whatever. And so they had to figure out a way around that, and they're re-editing it and stuff. But that's got a lot of really cool stuff and interviews with a lot of the old timers. I just also interviewed Ezra Auerbach, and we just released his podcast recently, and he was doing solar for a long time. In fact, I'm going to talk to him really soon. And so I kind of like talking with these old timers about solar. Another really cool guy, 1977, Ward Bauer is his name, invented the grid tie inverter, and he's still active with NABCEP. So that's pretty cool. And I remember going into Sandia Lab with him when I was on the NABCEP exam committee, and I was writing with him, and I was like, "What's the oldest project you have here?" And he goes, "Well, it was this one, but we just took it down." I was like, "What did you take it down for?" That was like the oldest grid tied system in the world. It would be just kind of cool to keep it running, just to say that this, however long this stuff works. Because you hear people all the time talk about 30-year warranty or 25-year warranty, and they think, "Oh, I got to replace it." Like even my friend Matt that just gave me a PV system, it was just about 20 years old. And I take the used PV, and that's what I use for personal use. I've got a whole bunch on my mom's roof of secondhand PV modules. And so you talk about the cheapest price per watt, it's people giving you free stuff. And the carport here, somebody else gave me a 20-year-old system. It's probably a little bit over 20 years old. And it's like, it makes the same sine wave, it makes the same electricity pretty much. And so it's pretty fun to take solar that's free. In fact, one of the things that I think people should do is take their old PV system and then put it on their north roof and then have the new one on the south roof. Like, why get rid of something that works perfectly well? And if they don't want to do that, they can give it to me. Like, you hear all this talk about like, oh, people are going to fill up all the landfills with solar and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, if it still works, there's a lot of people who take it for free. Right now, we got 20% efficient PV. These Arco solar modules from 1980s, they might have been 10% efficient. And then like, what's it going to be 20, 30 years from now? I don't think it's going to hit 30, you know? And so all it means is it just takes up more space. You know, maybe it'll hit 30. I mean, we do have 30% efficient PV, but I just mean the type of PV that would be cost effective. You know, if you're going to buy 30% efficient PV and it costs 20 times more, it's just like, just use up a little bit more space.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I had at some point 4 or 5 panels from a project that we couldn't, I forgot how, but we had them just sitting in a warehouse, just taking up dust. It's like, well, they are fine, but you cannot sell 4 panels to homeowners. It's not big enough. So that's what I did. I put them on my north facing roof. And guess what? It produces power, maybe not as efficient as if it was facing south, but I don't have a steep roof, so it produces just fine.
Yeah, I don't want to give away or bust anybody, but I was in a different country and they were selling solar and they actually, this is kind of crazy, but they had like a low slope roof and they had some solar modules that they're waiting to sell. And so they just like plugged a few in series and then stuck them into the wall, you know? And there it's kind of easy too because you don't have like split phase with 12240 and all that kind of stuff. And so they just like plugged it into the wall. And I'm sure if there was going to be a typhoon or something, they would have just grabbed the solar and put it inside, or, you know, it's just like a crystal, you know, it's not like you're wearing it out really, you know. I mean, there's like a little bit of light induced degradation at the beginning of the life of the PV module, but it's not that significant. And I do know people too that have like a bunch of PV, like I have it just sitting there, not plugged in, but I've seen people that just lay it on the ground, plug it in, you know. And of course, that's not legal, not the legal way to do it. You could be spinning a meter backwards and they could find out about that and know about it. But it just seems terrible to me that people would just take a perfectly good functioning PV module and waste all their time putting it in the dump,
Yeah.
you know, and all that good energy if it works. And how often do you see one that doesn't work? It's like, you know what I want to get my hands on is one of those old 1954 Bell Labs solar modules. I'd love to have one of those, you know?
I think that's a request to your audience, right? If anyone has one,
Yeah, if anybody has one,
please send it to Sean.
yeah, yeah. And there's got to be one in a museum. It's like this stuff lasts forever and ever. And then it also makes good background. So my friend Bill Brooks, my friend Jeff Spees, when you talk to them, when they're sitting at home on their Zoom, they have a whole background of it. You know, it's like I don't because I'm just sitting in a different place every time, you know. So I'm like, just put this nice picture of a sailboat and solar behind me. But yeah, the solar industry has changed so much. It's like they say that a solar company was two guys in a pickup truck, and that was like your sales, your design, the whole thing. And it was like, could have been one guy because they were small, they were light, things like that. Like you're saying, wooden racks, a lot less rules. And then now it's like the companies are everything, the whole industry is getting super specialized. Like I can remember people wanting a permit package and somebody's like, can you do this for him? And I was like, I guess. And I was like, I'd do it for $1,000. And that was like over 10 years ago. And so even if you look for inflation, maybe that's kind of like $1,500 today, but there's a whole bunch of people doing it for like $300, you know, or some people even give you a discount for just a, you know, residential permit. They're just specializing. And I like being an entrepreneur. So I kind of like the idea of starting your own solar company, farming out for different things like permits and things like that. But also, you have the big companies where there's thousands of people working there and they have their own departments and they wouldn't just have a permitting department. I'm sure their permitting department is broken down into a lot of different specialties. And so that's kind of cool, but also for the people that get so fine tuned when they're in just like one little aspect of permitting, It could make it harder for them to be an entrepreneur and then go start their own company because they're just like, well, I'm really good at single line drawings for in-phase inverters. That's all I've
Yeah.
done for the last 10 years or something like that. And I even saw that like back when I started full-time training in 2008. There's a big rush for people to get trained, and it seemed like there was like a whole bunch of trainers. And then a couple of years later, there wasn't as much for all of the trainers for one reason or another. Could have been community colleges or whatever it was. And so a lot of these trainers, though, they were the smart people out there, a lot of them, and they went and got jobs for the big companies. Like I remember talking to and having recruiters coming at me from like SunPower, First Solar, some of those big companies like that. And I didn't take it because they're just like, I don't want to be able to get fired. Like I worked hard at what I'm doing and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And it was kind of scary for a while. And you'd be like, man, it's been a whole month and I haven't had a class, but I just stuck with it. And so that kind of paid off.
I think you're the
And
most famous teacher out there for now.
well, we got some other people. Like I know that my person that I teach with, Bill Brooks, he's been doing it for the longest time, but I think he's doing like not as much percentage of his time teaching. Mostly he's doing a lot of this consulting and going to court and all this stuff, being an expert witness, getting hired by inverter companies and things like that. So he's like pretty much the ultimate consultant for people that want to get the right guy to do that kind of stuff.
I met him once and I thanked him for all
Uh,
his knowledge that he just made available to everyone. At the beginning, my very first solar company, I didn't want to buy the NEC book, it was too expensive.
uh-huh.
But his PDFs of Bill Brooks were available. And so you just read it again and again until you understand everything in it and you know how to design.
Great. Yeah.
I have one more question for you about the NEC code. Do you have one favorite NEC code? What's your favorite number?
You mean like 690 solar photovoltaic systems, like that? So that
Yeah.
would be like, of course, it's got to be my favorite article, 690.
Yeah, but that's the
Um,
entire article. You don't have in there like one that stands out or
oh, let's see. Well, I think one that's going to be the one of the future is 705.13. And that's now called energy management systems. And when it first came out, it was called power control systems, but it's essentially the same thing. And so that's for when you're backfeeding, you're doing your interconnection in Article 705, interconnected power production sources. And so you have your supply side connection when you're going between the meter and the main breaker. And when you have your load side connection, when you're connecting on the load side of the main breaker. And then if you don't want to follow any of those rules, you got 705.13. And with 705.13, as long as you have brains, so you have electronics, you're monitoring currents and you're using smart electronics, smart inverters, and things like that, then you don't have to follow those rules. You could hook up infinity amps of inverters, not like there is infinity amps of inverters out there, but in theory, infinity -1 amps of inverters to 100 amp service. And that's because you would just be controlling things. And so if you think about that, if you had a 100 amp service and you have like 200 amps of PV, 200 amps of energy storage, 200 amps of bidirectional electric vehicles, it's sort of just like the 100 amps to the grid is just another power source. Or perhaps you could also send power back to it, depending on what kind of net metering policy you have where you are. And net metering is kind of going to go away to some degree, hopefully gradually, instead of the crazy sudden thing they did in California. But solar is cheaper, energy storage is cheaper, electric vehicles are cheaper. The grid can only handle so much. And with 705.13, we could coordinate everything. And so the tricky part is we need people that know solar and software like you to be able to figure out how to program all these things and how to coordinate with the utility and make it so the Public Utility Commission agrees with all of what you're doing. And so it's sort of like we need somebody that not only understands solar, not only understands computers, but has to understand politics, policy, and if it is understandable, attorneys. No, like I have attorney friends, but otherwise, the ones that aren't my friends, I don't like them. No. Attorney jokes, right? You see the attorney that says, first thing, kill all the lawyers. And it's like, it's my dad wearing the shirt who's an attorney or something like that. Even they know So yeah, 705.13 is pretty cool. It's pretty non-controversial, but it's so new. It's such a future thing. And, we need to have more inventions. It's sort of like the code is way ahead of the policy and the hardware and the software out there. So it'll be exciting when we see all of this stuff catching up. And with solar and intermittent renewables, solar and wind growing so fast, we do need to do all this so we can handle all of this electricity on the grid. And, once we can do that, we don't have to have just like the old style grid where centralized power is what you have. Or instead of like having a natural gas power plant, essentially you could duplicate that with a giant battery bank and a giant solar system. But instead of just doing that too, if you just have lots of small battery banks and bidirectional electric vehicles and things distributed all over the place where it could be centrally controlled, I kind of look at it too as like even capitalism, where it's like electricity is more expensive here. I'll buy this one from you. Like maybe I could sell my electricity to my neighbor in one degree or another, where there is a power line between us, but there needs to be some kind of policy where I have 3 cars that are electric sitting in the driveway for a month while I'm on vacation, a big old PV system, big old battery, and my neighbor got friends over and they need to charge their cars. Right now there's not like a good common sense policy for that. And so we need common sense. And I'm going to leave it up to you to do that because all these special acronyms and abbreviations like API, sauce, all that kind of stuff. Give me some API sauce.
Yeah, give me some better sauce. Well, we are working on it, quite frankly. That's what we're working towards. Not everything is set up yet, that's for sure, but it's coming.
Yeah, so we just need a lot of super cool nerds, out there. There's a lot of them, or maybe there's a lot of us, you could say, Is that like a real thing? Cool nerds? I don't know. I think so.
I think so. We have unanimity here. So yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. So thank you so much again, Herve Billiet, for being on the podcast and talking about Sunvoy at sunvoy.com and Ipsun and how your experience selling your company. And any other things, we're at the show notes. We'll put where to find you and things like that. And we'll put a link to the podcast that we had with you and maybe a couple other podcasts that we referenced. And anything else you want to say? Any other comments?
No.
Endorsements? You want to endorse any political candidates? Just kidding. I try to remain neutral publicly, but I definitely have my own opinions. I don't want to make anybody mad. So, yep.
We're in Washington, D.C., so it's quite common discussion here to talk about politics, but, we believe that if you come in person, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, okay. All right. And then we'll just let people guess what we think. What do we think? Yep. All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to Solar, S-E-A-N, that's how to spell Sean, S-E-A-N, solarsean.com, and get yourself NABCEP certified and go talk to Herve at one of these big solar conferences, and he'll tell you how to sell your company for $1 billion. $1 billion. Right, Herve?
Absolutely. I'll give advice. Sure.
Thanks.